Hollywood promised reinvention, but in January 1947, one young woman became its most enduring, unanswered question. Before the nickname, before the headlines, she was Elizabeth Short, 22, restless, and far from home. The first witness was not a detective, not a reporter, but a mother walking her child. At first glance, the shape near the weeds seemed unreal, almost placed there to be misunderstood. She found words for the police, but no words could explain what she had just seen. When officers reached Norton Avenue, the case already felt different from anything waiting in their files. The tape held back the crowd, but it could not hold back the story forming outside. By noon, Los Angeles had a crime scene. By nightfall, the newspapers had a legend. The city would soon search her past, but every answer seemed to create another shadow. If the killer wanted attention, they chose the one city that knew how to manufacture myth. The first task was simple on paper: protect the scene before curiosity destroyed what evidence remained. There was no obvious struggle here, no clear path, no simple story written into the dirt. Detectives suspected the lot was not the murder site, only the place chosen for discovery. Betty repeated the discovery carefully, but trauma had already made every second feel uncertain. Hyper-realistic, 8K, cinematic lighting, shot on 35mm lens, noir thriller atmosphere. The medical details were handled behind closed doors, where horror became measurements, timing, and cause. The victim was soon identified as Elizabeth Short, a young woman whose real life was already being rewritten. For Elizabeth's family, the case was not a headline. It was a daughter suddenly lost to strangers. The nickname stuck faster than the facts, turning Elizabeth into a symbol before she could be understood. In the newsroom, every missing detail became an opening for rumor, and rumor traveled faster than evidence. To understand the murder, investigators needed Elizabeth's final days, but those days refused to stay clear. Red Manley admitted giving Elizabeth a ride, making him important before he was truly understood. She was heading back toward Los Angeles, carrying hopes that now felt painfully ordinary. The Biltmore became a landmark in her timeline, but even landmarks can hide uncertainty. She may have waited for someone there, but the record leaves the meeting unanswered. After that point, Elizabeth's trail thinned into silence, and silence became the killer's strongest ally. Every phone number promised movement, but most led only to confusion, gossip, or another false memory. Everyone had seen Elizabeth somewhere, but memory became unreliable once newspapers printed her face. The case attracted people who wanted attention, guilt, fame, or some private reason to step into darkness. Inside the evidence room, Elizabeth's life became objects, each one too small for the grief attached. A photograph gave detectives her face, but not the fear she may have carried at the end. The precision suggested knowledge, but knowledge alone could not identify a person, motive, or room. Investigators looked toward medical circles, but suspicion is not proof, and proof kept slipping away. Police withheld details to catch the killer, while newspapers demanded details to feed the city. Each edition made her more famous, and less visible as the person her family remembered. Then came messages claiming closeness to the crime, and detectives had to ask who truly knew anything. A letter can sound intimate, but intimacy can be forged by anyone reading the morning paper. When belongings appeared, investigators saw calculation. Someone understood exactly how attention could be controlled. Manley's story mattered, because timelines depend on ordinary choices, and ordinary choices rarely look clean later. Even when suspicion weakened, public memory had already learned to keep his name near the mystery. Elizabeth moved through temporary rooms, where privacy was thin and everyone noticed just enough to speculate. Friends remembered fragments, places she mentioned, men who called, plans that seemed unfinished or uncertain. She became linked to Hollywood glamour, though her real days were often unstable, modest, and lonely. The nickname was catchy, cruelly elegant, and powerful enough to eclipse the woman beneath it. The more people claimed to see her, the harder it became to know where she truly was. Some witnesses were sincere, but sincerity could still misidentify a face, repeated across every front page. The contradictions were not dramatic at first. They were small, stubborn, and impossible to ignore. The investigation became a wall of paper surrounding one blank space where Elizabeth vanished. If Elizabeth was held somewhere, Los Angeles offered countless rooms where screams could become silence. Police searched for a hidden location because the vacant lot felt like the final stage, not the crime. Medical skill became a theory, but every theory still needed a name that evidence could hold. Suspects came and went, but suspicion without proof became another kind of dead end. She knew men in Los Angeles, but knowing someone is not the same as trusting them. Every name in her address book became a doorway, though most opened into ordinary disappointment. Some callers offered clues, then disappeared, leaving detectives with voices they could not put into rooms. Even reporters chasing the story could feel the line between public interest and public appetite thinning. While Los Angeles debated theories, Elizabeth's mother held photographs and faced a loss no headline could carry. The longer the case remained unsolved, the easier it became for myth to replace biography. Years later, one theory would pull an elegant doctor into the center of the Black Dahlia story. But a theory, however compelling to some, is not the same as a courtroom answer. Hodell's world looked polished from the outside, which only made later suspicions feel more disturbing. The most famous Hodell accusation came decades later, from a son examining his father's shadow. No suspect, including those debated for generations, ever became the person officially charged with her murder. Once a case becomes legend, every generation adds another suspect, another motive, another profitable certainty. The loudest voices in the case belonged to everyone except Elizabeth herself. Behind every theory was a young woman whose ordinary fears were easier to erase than protect. They buried it beneath performances of guilt. The department chased hundreds of leads, but urgency could not turn noise into evidence. Each failed lead left behind a new kind of damage. Hope briefly raised, then quietly removed. The medical skill theory stayed alive because the crime seemed controlled, but control was not identity. The room where Elizabeth died, if it still existed, never gave itself to the investigation. Sometimes detectives stared hardest at the smallest objects, hoping one overlooked mark would finally speak. The letters promised closeness to the truth, but each promise demanded proof the writer rarely provided. Handwriting could suggest, eliminate, or mislead, but it could not resurrect the missing hours. If the sender was the killer, they understood theater. If not, someone understood the newspapers. Los Angeles kept expecting a dramatic arrest, but the case answered drama with delay. The suspect list grew large enough to impress the public and weak enough to frustrate the police. One changed statement could mean fear, confusion, publicity, or the simple failure of memory. Investigators returned again and again to the last confirmed hours, hoping the missing person would appear. If she met someone after the lobby, that person carried the answer beyond the reach of witnesses. Somewhere between public light and private darkness, Elizabeth crossed into the part of the story no one saw. The final doorway in her life remains unknown, and that absence still shapes every theory. In 1947, forensic science had limits, and the killer may have benefited from every one. Every unsolved day turned fresh evidence into history, and history into something easier to argue over. For her mother, the question was not who made headlines, but who took her child away. The case did not just consume the public, it consumed her family. It wore down the people assigned to answer it. Newsrooms moved forward, but the mystery stayed behind, waiting for someone to notice it again. A case does not turn cold all at once. It cools each time certainty fails. Decades later, researchers returned to the files, each hoping the past had left one overlooked answer. Theories multiplied because the case offered just enough evidence to tempt certainty, never enough to secure it. Hodell's name endures because the theory feels cinematic, but endurance is not the same as legal proof. Other names surfaced across decades, each carrying a story, a motive, and a missing piece. To respect Elizabeth, every theory must carry doubt honestly, not disguise speculation as justice. The same hunger that filled newspapers now lives in screens, podcasts, documentaries, and comment sections. The case asks viewers to choose between entertainment and evidence, between fascination and responsibility. The most important correction is also the simplest. Elizabeth Short was not a myth. Some cases remain open, not because no one cared, but because caring could not defeat absence. The places remain, changed by time, but the missing hours still refuse to belong anywhere. The lot became a location people visit, but for Elizabeth, it was the place strangers found her. No final confession has settled the case, only claims circling the silence left behind. Officially, Elizabeth Short's murder remains unsolved, a fact that outlived every confident theory. Closure is a word outsiders use. Families live with something quieter, heavier, and far less complete. For detectives, an unsolved murder does not end. It simply learns to wait inside memory. Hollywood kept selling dreams, even after one dreamer became evidence, headline, and warning. The responsible answer is not always satisfying. Possible suspects exist, but certainty does not. Evidence can say where she was found, when she vanished, and how little certainty survived. Rumor fills silence quickly, but it rarely cares who gets buried beneath the story. To remember her well, the story must return to the person before the name became legend. Every theory forgets something simple. An empty chair remained where a daughter should have returned. The file remains open because one person knew the answer, and that person never gave it. The last walk we imagine for Elizabeth may be wrong, because imagination is all the silence allows. The killer's greatest advantage was not cleverness alone, but the ability to disappear into ordinary Los Angeles. There is no genius to celebrate here, only harm, cowardice, and a wound left open. Closing the box does not close the case. It only protects what remains from more damage. When you hear the name Black Dahlia, do you imagine the mystery or remember Elizabeth? The person responsible may be gone, but the unanswered question still stands beneath the streetlight. Which theory seems most responsible to you, and which one depends too much on myth? Elizabeth disappeared once in life, then again behind the legend built after her death. The file stayed open, waiting for a truth that never walked back through the door. Hollywood kept its lights on, but one shadow from 1947 never fully left the city.